Zaid never imagined that this would be his last night at home, that the walls that once held his childhood memories would also hold the last conversation he would ever have. No one outside that house knew what was happening behind closed doors. The neighbors heard nothing unusual. The world outside moved as if everything was normal, but inside something had shifted. A quiet storm was building, one that would change everything. His father, Hassan, had always been a man of deep beliefs, respected, devoted. To most, he was a figure of wisdom, a guiding force in his family. But that night, something inside him refused to bend. The air grew heavier with every passing moment. Words turned sharp, the space between them shrinking. What started as a conversation became something else entirely. And then, silence. By morning, nothing would be the same. A choice had been made. A line had been crossed. And when the truth finally came to light, an entire community was left with one question. How did it come to this? This is a story about conviction, love, and a moment that could never be undone. A story that forces us to ask, how far will someone go when they believe they are doing the right thing? Stay with us as we uncover the events of that night. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and like the page. There are many more waiting to be told. Zaid had always felt different. Even as a child, he knew there was something about him that didn't quite fit into the world he was born into. His home was built on faith, discipline, and unspoken rules, rules that he quickly learned he was expected to follow without question. His father, Hassan, was a man of strong beliefs, someone who commanded respect. To those around him, he was seen as a devoted leader, a man of principle. But inside their home, there was no room for mistakes, no space for defiance. From an early age, Zaid understood that certain things could never be spoken aloud. The way he felt, the thoughts that kept him awake at night, he had to bury them. He tried to change, to force himself into the image his father wanted him to be. He prayed, he stayed silent, he pretended. But no matter how much he tried, the truth never went away. In the quiet moments, when no one was watching, he allowed himself to imagine a different life. He would sit by his window, staring at the city beyond, wondering if there was a place where he could be free, a place where he didn't have to hide. But deep down, he knew that kind of life was impossible, not in the world his father had built around him. Hassan had spent his entire life upholding tradition. He had been raised in a household where faith came before everything, before love, before personal desires, before even family. To him, there was right and wrong, and no in-between. He believed he was protecting his son, guiding him onto the right path. Any sign of defiance, any challenge to his authority, was seen as a failure. Over the years, small things began to unsettle him. Zaid's quiet nature, the way he avoided certain conversations, the way he never seemed interested in the life expected of him. At first, Hassan dismissed it, but then whispers began to spread. Family members, neighbors, they noticed things. And in a community where reputation meant everything, where honor was tied to obedience, these rumors were dangerous. Hassan felt the pressure building. He heard the subtle comments, the questions laced with concern. Was Zaid different? Had he lost his way? He felt eyes on him, waiting for him to act, to set things right. And in a world where reputation was everything, a father could not afford to be seen as weak. Zaid had spent years hiding, carefully choosing his words, guarding his actions. But secrets have a way of unraveling when least expected. One evening, Hassan's phone buzzed. A relative had sent a message. Just a few words, but they shattered everything. A rumor had been spreading. Whispers of Zaid's truth had reached the wrong ears. Hassan's hands clenched around the phone as he read and reread the words, hoping they were a mistake. But deep inside, he had always known. He had seen the signs. He had ignored them. Heart pounding, he stormed into Zaid's room. His son was sitting at his desk, unaware of what was coming. The door slammed shut, shaking the walls. Zaid turned, confusion flickering across his face before he saw the phone in his father's hand. In that instant, he knew. The truth had been forced into the light. The air between them thickened. Hassan's voice was low at first, but the words carried a weight that made Zaid's chest tighten. He tried to explain, to diffuse the anger growing in his father's eyes, but every word only made it worse. His father didn't just hear the words, he saw them as an attack, a betrayal, an unforgivable stain on their family. Fear crept into Zaid's bones. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but nothing could have prepared him for the storm that was now raging in front of him. And then came the worst words of all. "You are not my son." Zaid felt his world collapse. Hassan was not a man who acted on impulse. He believed in control, in order. But after that night, something inside him snapped. At first, he tried to fix what he saw as a problem. He believed Zaid was lost, that he could be saved. And so, the days that followed were filled with quiet punishments. The house became a prison. Conversations turned into interrogations. There were no more casual moments, no more warmth. Zaid was forced to pray for hours, locked in his room with only religious texts. His phone was taken, his freedom stripped away. The psychological battle had begun. Each morning, Hassan's voice echoed through the house, lectures on duty, honor, and the shame Zaid had brought upon them. The words cut deep, but it was the silence between them that hurt more. His mother averted her eyes. His siblings spoke in hushed tones. He had become a ghost in his own home. Then came the threats. Hassan began to speak of consequences, of how the world would never accept someone like Zaid, of what the community would do if they found out, of what he would do if Zaid continued down this path. Zaid felt the walls closing in. Late at night, he would press his forehead against the cold glass of his window, the city beyond so close, yet so far. He thought about running, about escaping to a place where he could finally breathe. But where would he go? Who would take him in? Then, one night, an opportunity. A friend had reached out, a lifeline, a chance to leave, to start over somewhere safe. Zaid hesitated, torn between fear and hope. But deep down, he knew the truth. If he stayed, he would not survive this. So he made a decision. He packed a small bag, waited for the house to fall into silence, and stepped towards the door. But he never made it out. A floorboard creaked beneath his weight. And then came the voice, low, steady, waiting. "Where do you think you're going?" Zaid turned, heart pounding, as his father's shadow stretched across the darkened hallway. Everything was about to change. The house was silent, a deep, suffocating silence that carried the weight of something inevitable. The air inside felt thick, as if holding its breath, waiting. It was a night like any other, yet something had shifted. The walls of that house, which had witnessed years of love and conflict, were about to hold a secret so dark, so irreversible, that it would never be the same again. Zaid sat in his room, the dim glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the walls. He had barely spoken in days. Every attempt to reach out, to explain, to plead, had been met with silence, or worse, cold indifference. His father had barely looked at him, but the weight of his unspoken thoughts had been crushing. But tonight, something was different. The footsteps outside his room were heavier, slower, purposeful. The door creaked open. There stood Hassan, his face unreadable, his presence overbearing. In his hands, something glinted faintly in the dim light. There was no shouting, no angry words, just a stare that bore into Zaid's soul. And then, the first movement. The struggle was brief, almost too brief. There were no dramatic screams, no last words, only a quiet resistance, a silent plea, a desperate gasp, a grasping of fingers that never found purchase, a sudden overwhelming stillness. And then, nothing. Zaid was gone. Hassan stepped back, his hands trembling, his breath uneven. He looked down at what he had done, but his face held no regret, no hesitation. His mind had been made up long before this night. To him, this was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of purification, a restoration of honor. He stood in the dim light, staring at the stillness before him, convincing himself that this was the only way. He had done what had to be done, and in his mind, there was no other choice. The house remained quiet, almost too quiet. The air felt different, thicker, heavier, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the weight of what had just occurred. Hassan did not run. He did not panic. Instead, he sat down in the living room, steadying his breath, as if preparing himself for what came next. When the police arrived, responding to a concerned neighbor who had heard muffled noises, they found him sitting there, his hands still marked with the evidence of his actions. He did not resist. He did not deny it. He only uttered a few words, words that sent a chill through everyone who heard them. I did what was necessary. To him, this was not a crime. This was not a mistake. This was justice, delivered by his own hands. As the officers led him away, the community whispered, some in horror, some in understanding, and some in quiet, unsettling approval. The world outside continued as it always had. The sun still rose, the streets still bustled with life. But inside that home, a silence remained, a silence that would never be filled again. The trial began on a cold morning, the kind of morning where the air felt heavier, where even the sky seemed to withhold its light. The courtroom was packed, filled with journalists, activists, and silent onlookers who had come to witness a case that had already sent shockwaves far beyond this one city. Hassan stood before the judge, his posture unwavering. He did not look defeated. He did not look ashamed. If anything, he looked convinced that what he had done was right. When asked to explain himself, he spoke with certainty, his voice steady. He did not deny his actions. He did not weep, did not beg for forgiveness. Instead, he framed his actions as necessary, as a duty to something far greater than himself. He spoke of honor, of faith, of obedience to a law he believed was higher than any court of man. But the prosecution was relentless. They painted a different picture, one of a father consumed by control, driven by fear, blinded by beliefs that left no room for love, no room for humanity. Witnesses were called experts in psychology, in religious extremism, in family dynamics. They explained how a mind can be shaped, how traditions can become chains, how a man can convince himself that cruelty is righteousness. The jury listened, their faces unreadable. The judge remained still, his hands folded as he watched the man before him unravel. Then came the final verdict. Guilty. The room was silent, the kind of silence that presses against the walls, waiting to break. The words were spoken, echoing through the air like a final toll of a distant bell. Hassan's fate was sealed. But was it enough? For some, justice had been served. For others, the punishment was too light, an insult to the life that had been lost. And for a few, those who whispered in dark corners, Hassan was not a criminal. He was a martyr. And that was perhaps the most chilling part of all. This was not just about one family. one father, one son. This was a story repeated across borders, across cultures, across generations. Around the world there were others like Zaid, young souls trapped in homes that did not accept them, forced to choose between silence and survival. Some escaped, others never got the chance. There were families like Hassan's too, households where honor was valued more than love, where tradition crushed individuality, where faith was used not as a source of guidance, but as a weapon. Experts analyzed the deeper causes, the cycle of control, the fear of shame, the way entire communities could turn a blind eye, justifying what should never be justified. They spoke of the slow change, the push for progress, the voices fighting back against beliefs that had been rooted for centuries. But the question remained: how do you change a mind that refuses to see? How do you stop an ideology that does not bend? And how many more would suffer before the world finally learned? Zaid was more than a name in a tragic headline. He was a son, a friend, a person filled with dreams he never got to chase. He wanted love. He wanted freedom. He wanted time. But all of that was taken from him. Imagine you were Zaid's friend. You knew what he was going through. You saw the fear in his eyes. What would you have done? What could anyone have done to save him? Would you have spoken up? Would you have tried to help? Or would fear have kept you silent? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Because maybe, just maybe, talking about it today could save a life tomorrow. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because stories like this should never be forgotten, and conversations like this need to happen.